Welcome to the Novaworks Learning Center. In this video, we will demonstrate how to tag a simple 10Q cover page for inline XBRL. We've already introduced cover page tagging in previous tutorials, specifically the XDX Setup Wizard tutorial and the simple 8K cover page tagging tutorial. This tutorial will go over the basic information for cover page tagging. If you've already watched both the previous tutorials, feel free to skip ahead. Typically, the XDX Setup Wizard will tag most if not all of your cover page elements automatically, which we demonstrated in the XDX Setup Wizard tutorial. There may be times when the wizard misses one or more data points or when you choose not to automatically tag the cover page. This video will demonstrate inline tagging tools to add XDX tagging for the cover page facts for a 10Q. This is the same process as tagging the cover page for other forms. Let's talk about the different types of data you might find on a cover page. First, there are ballot boxes, which are used to represent fact data for elements with a Boolean data type. Ballot boxes are presented as checkbox characters on the cover page. Filers typically use Unicode characters, wingdings, or a symbol font, or just simple bracket characters to represent checkboxes. Inline XBRL works best if you use Unicode versions of the ballot boxes, though XDX will process the tagging around other kinds as well. We recommend that you use the Unicode characters if possible. On a 10Q, ballot box data will be tagged for elements like the Document Quarterly Report or Document Transition Report elements. For ballot boxes, you tag the ballot box character. An empty ballot box is the equivalent to false for fact data. A checked ballot box is the equivalent to true for fact data. The next type of data you'll find on a cover page is textual. Textual data covers most of the data that you will tag. This includes the registrant name, address, period of the report, security titles, basically any data that has corresponding text on the cover page. For textual data, you tag the text for the fact. And finally, there are yes/no questions. Most of these questions start with the phrase, indicate by checkmark. The answer is usually represented by checkbox characters followed by the word yes and the word no. Rather than tagging the checkbox character, you tag the yes or the no. Before we start, there's one final note for the filer category information. On the 10Q cover page, the filer category is represented by a checkmark. Registrants check a box to indicate whether they are a large accelerated filer, an accelerated filer, a non-accelerated filer, or a smaller reporting company. In inline XBRL, the fact data for the filer category is handled differently. Even though these items are checkboxes, they are not ballot box or yes/no data. For tagging purposes, we treat them as text. The entity filer category element pertains only to the large accelerated, or non-accelerated status. For this element, you will tag the text of the checked item. For example, you tag the text large accelerated filer if you are a large accelerated filer, instead of the ballot box character. In the 2019 DEI taxonomy, smaller reporting company is no longer a valid value for the entity filer category element. For smaller reporting companies, the entity filer category should correspond to their filer category. Smaller reporting companies can then tag the ballot box character next to the smaller reporting company text to indicate that they are a small business. We'll go over exactly how to do this later in the video. Our sample 10Q is a smaller reporting company. Now that we know the different types of data to expect on the cover page, let's proceed to GoFiler. We have open a simple 10Q document for a single registrant. This document happens to be in GoFiler's samples folder if you want to follow along. We already set up the taxonomy information for the document using the XDX Setup Wizard, which was covered in a previous tutorial. To start, you need to know what data is required to be visible on the cover page of your inline XBRL filing. We have a free cover page fact sheet that you can download from our reference library at www.novaworkssoftware.com to help you identify the data points and the elements to use. The first thing that we'll tag is the form type. Using the keyboard or mouse, select only the submission type on the cover page. This is 10-Q for this document. If you are filing an amendment, the submission type would be 10-Q/A. Select only the form name. Make sure not to include the word form. Then go to the XDX markup ribbon and click the Inline Fact button. This opens the Inline Tagging tool. This is the tool that we use to tag each fact on the cover page. We can set the element information for the fact as well as the context information. Let's go ahead and start. First, enter the element name into the element field. If we don't know the element name, we can search for it by clicking on the button to the right of the element field. Enter some keywords to search. Then click Search. Here's the document type element, which we can see is the submission type. Click OK. As you can see, the dialog is populated with information for the element. None of these options for precision, negated, heading, or totals are necessary for cover page elements, so we can leave all of them alone. You can enter a label for the element if you want. Leaving the label field blank will just use the standard label for the element when you make your inline XBRL. For the most part, using standard labels for the cover page is fine. We'll move on to the context information by clicking the Next button. Now for each of these facts, you want to use the period of the report as the context. You can enter that information into the type, start date, and end date fields. We can also use the preset drop list if our report has standard quarter ends. This little button to the right of the preset drop-down list opens a library of contexts that have already been defined within the document. We haven't made any context yet, so let's enter the data manually. The type is duration. We know that because the element's period type is duration and, as mentioned before, these facts use the period of the report for their context. The start date field is the starting date of the period. Use the calendar to pick the starting date. The end date field is the ending date of the period. Use the calendar to pick the ending date. For simple 10Qs, there are no dimensions or members to worry about. If you have co-registrants or are tagging a cover page for dual-listed companies, you may have to add dimensional information. We'll cover that in a separate tutorial. Click Next to proceed to the next step. This last screen lets you set footnote references if there are any. We don't have any, so we'll just leave this option blank. And then there is also this option to run the inline tagging tool again. You would use this option if the data you selected was used for more than one fact. In this case, we have one fact for the document element type, so we'll leave this option unchecked. Click Finish. The XDX engram was added around the form type. You can see the little cross icon appear that marks the location of the XDX information. If we click on that data, you can see the XDX information in the Management View window. Let's tag another data point. Select the ballot box for the Quarterly Report option. Click Inline Fact. Select the element. This item uses the Document Quarterly Report element. Click Next. Now we can select our context from the library by clicking on the button to the right of the preset field. Our context is in the list box. Select it. Click OK. It cloned the context information for us. Click Next. And Finish. This checkbox is now tagged also. Next is the period of the report. Select it. Go to the Inline Fact tool. Select the element. For this item, it is the Document Period and Date element. Click Next. Add the context information. Click Next. And Finish. The date of the report is now tagged also. You can use the inline tagging tool to tag the remaining facts on the cover page. I'm going to show you how to use another method to tag data that's a little faster. This method works once you have started your tagging process. It uses the copy engram function. Right-click on the end date of the report that we just tagged. When you right-click inside an inline engram, the Copy Engram item is available on the menu. Select it. Then use the mouse or keyboard to select the next piece of data to tag. This time it is the ballot box for the Document Transition Report element. Use Paste or Ctrl-V. Looking in the Management view, you can see that the engram information is now applied to that ballot box character as well. Click on the element name in the Management view. Now change the element name from Document Period End Date to Document Transition Report. Click OK. The XDX engram now has our new element. Using this method can save a little time since we don't need to save the context information for each item. The registrant name, state of jurisdiction, file number, and IRS number all follow the same process, as does the address and telephone number. It's important to note that the text you select for the registrant name element must match exactly the name under which the company is registered with the SEC. Remember that the text you select will become the fact value for the chosen element. If the fact data for the entity registrant name doesn't exactly match the SEC's official registrant name, your filing will be suspended by the EDGAR system. Remember for the address to separately tag each item. There are elements for each line of the address, the city, state, and zip code. For the phone number, there are also separate elements for the area code and the local number. If the registrant has a former name or address, you should tag that as well. If you don't have a former name or address, you don't need to tag anything. Let's tag the securities table next. Our sample has a single security that is traded on one exchange using a trading symbol. For other examples that have multiple securities and multiple exchanges, and for information on how to use the No Trading Symbol flag element, see our other cover page tagging tutorials. To tag the security title, we can use the inline tagging tool or the copy and paste engram method. We'll show the inline tagging tool again. Enter the appropriate element. Click Next. Enter the context. Click Next. and then click Finish. Repeat the process for the trading symbol and for the exchange name. Next, there are some yes/no questions. As we mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial, you want to tag the yes or no text that corresponds to the response for each question. The first question corresponds to the Entity Current Reporting Status element. Our filer is current, so we select yes. Open the Inline Fact tool and set the element. Click Next. Add the context information. Click Next, and Finish. We'll do the same for the second question. Next is the filer category. Here's where things aren't as straightforward. We mentioned that for the filer category, you want to tag the text that corresponds to the selected category. However, for smaller reporting companies, there's no corresponding filer category value. So we're going to select Non-Accelerated Filer. This is the filer category for our company. Select the text that corresponds to your filer category. Tag this information with the Entity Filer Category element. Next, select the checkbox next to the Smaller Reporting Company response. If we are a smaller reporting entity, we tag this checkbox with the Entity Small Business element. The Entity Small Business element has a Boolean data type, which is why we need to select the ballot box. The Entity Filer Category element has a data type specific to SEC filings, which basically only allows the values Large Accelerated Filer, and Non-Accelerated Filer, which is why we need to select that matching text in our document. Next, we tag the Emerging Growth ballot box. This is also an element with a Boolean data type, so we can select the box and tag it with the appropriate element. The same is true for the Extended Transition Period item. Next, we have another yes/no question, so we'll select the indicated response and tag it with the correct element. And finally, we have shares outstanding. Depending on the company, there may be one or more values listed for outstanding shares. Each value must be tagged with the Entity Common Stock Shares Outstanding element and an appropriate context for that class of stock. If the common stock is also reported in the securities table and has shares outstanding listed, it should use the same dimension and member elements for both places. For more information on tagging multiple classes of stock, see our cover page tutorial on reporting multiple securities. We'll select the data and tag it with the Inline Fact tool. Set the element to Entity Common Stock Shares Outstanding. Click Next. And now we'll set the context to the date indicated in the text. This is a little different from other cover page facts because it uses an instant context. set the type to instant, and the date field to the date for the context. If we were reporting values for multiple classes of common stock, we would add the dimension and member elements here. Our cover page has one value, so we don't need to add anything else. Click Next. And finally, Finish. Now we have all the data points tagged, and our cover page is complete. What we have shown here is how to manually tag a cover page. Keep in mind that the Cover Page Wizard can be used to automatically tag most of the elements on the cover page, but it's useful to understand the tagging process and the elements recommended for the data. And that concludes our simple 10Q cover page tutorial. Thanks for watching.